Imagine yourself walking alone at night. The road is narrow, silent, and silvered by the cold breath of the moon. Each footstep echoes softly on the gravel, the only sound in a world that seems to be holding its breath. The trees stand still as silhouettes, their branches like black veins across the pale sky. The air is damp, tasting faintly of iron and salt. And then from the corner of your visions, someone moves. She steps into the moonlight. A woman, beautiful beyond reason. Her hair falls like dark silk. Her skin glows faintly, as if woven from the same pale light that drifts across the path. Her eyes shimmer with warmth, her smile soft and magnetic. You feel an odd comfort, as though the night itself has decided to spare you. She does not speak, but her gaze calls to you. Without knowing why, you take a step closer. The closer you come, the more impossible she becomes. Her beauty feels too perfect to still. The moonlight slides down her figure and catches on something it should not. A flash of metal. One leg gleams like polished brass, reflecting the moon in cold, sharp flickers. The other rough, twisted seams made of something animal, the hide of a beast. You freeze. Her smile doesn't fade, but it changes, stretching slightly to wide. The warmth in her eyes drains away, replaced by an endless, unblinking hunger. Then her hair moves. It rides, though there is no wind. The silken strands ignite, each one turning into living fire that swirls and snaps above her head. Her face begins to shift, faster than your eyes can follow beauty collapsing into horror, youth aging into rot, human dissolving into beast. The smile becomes a wound that shows too many teeth. You stumble back, breath shallow, the night thickening around you. And then she speaks. Her voice is soft, almost kind, but under it lies something metallic, hollow, like wind whispering through a crypt. "Why are you afraid?" she asks. "Am I not beautiful?" You realize it then. Her beauty is a trap. Her face, her voice, her gentleness, they are the mask that hides the hunger. She does not attack. She only reaches out and touches your chest. Her fingers are colder than death. The chill spreads through you, climbing your spine, numbing your breath. You feel no wound, yet something vital is being pulled from you, drawn into her burning eyes. And for an instant, you see yourself reflected, their fading figure swallowed by the light of a predator. Then she is gone. No sound, no trace, only the night remains. But where she stood, the earth is scorched to faint marks in the dust, one of brass, one of ash. You have just met Empusa, the creature the ancient Greeks feared to name aloud, the one who leaps upon, a daughter or, perhaps servant of Hecate, goddess of witchcraft, necromancy, and the Crossroads. Empusa did not belong to Olympus, nor to the underworld entirely. She existed in between, in the liminal spaces where boundaries blur between life and death, desire and dread, human and beast. To the Greeks, she was not part of heroic myth, but of the night itself, a warning in human form. The whisper that told travelers not to wander off the lit road, not to trust what beckoned from the shadows. Parents used her name to hush their children. Lovers spoke of her in low voices, afraid that the dark might listen. Empusa was the fear that crept in once the fire went out. Her weapon was not strength, but illusion. She needed no claws, no fangs, only a smile that felt like sunlight, only a voice that felt safe. When you believed the lie, you were already lost. She was both the comfort and the consumption, the warmth and the void that followed it. The Greeks knew the danger of crossroads, the places where paths and worlds met. They believed that when the moon was high and the torches burned low, Hecate ruled the threshold, and Empusa walked beside her. Each appearance of Empusa was not only a hunt, but a warning. Step off the path, and the night will claim you. Stories of her past, from shepherds to sailors, from city streets to mountain firesides. The details changed, but the image remained. A woman of impossible beauty, a leg of gleaming metal, a mane of living flame. The mask beneath the moonlight, a mirror of every temptation that hides a wound beneath its glow. Perhaps what makes her terrifying is not her monstrousness, but her familiarity. Her face could be anyone's any dream, any longing you once trusted. Her voice sounds like every promise you've ever wanted to believe. That is why she endures. Empusa is not only a monster of the night, she is the reflection of the human hunger to be deceived. So the next time you hear something in the darkness, a faint metallic clink, clink, remember what the Greeks believed, that somewhere out there, beyond the circle of light, the brass foot of Empusa still walks the roads, patient as the moon. Not to hunt the body, but to test the soul. To ask, softly, beautifully, do you still think beauty is safe? Imagine the night widening around you. The echo of Empusa's steps has faded, but the stillness she left behind feels heavier, as if the air itself now belongs to someone else. You keep walking, the moon above you dimmed by drifting clouds, and the path splits 3 roads stretching into 3 different darknesses. Somewhere in your memory, an old whisper returns. Never take the middle road at night. That is where Hecate waits. The ancient Greeks feared the crossroads, not for what they could see, but for what they could feel. It was a liminal space, a place where boundaries dissolved. Life and death, past and present, the seen and the unseen all touched at that single point. To walk there after sunset was to invite attention from things that moved between worlds, and among those beings, Hecate reigned supreme. She was the torchbearer, the guardian of thresholds, the goddess who watched over births and burials alike. With one hand, she could guide the living. With the other, she could summon the restless dead. Her torches burned with the pale light of ghosts, and dogs howled whenever she passed. The people left offerings at the crossroads, honey eggs, bread, and bits of fish, small sacrifices to keep her favor, to ensure the spirits she commanded would remain at bay. Empusa was born, or perhaps forged within this shadowed dominion. Some called her Hecate's daughter, others her handmaiden, but the difference hardly mattered. What mattered was the purpose she served, to haunt the edges, to patrol the places where mortals forgot their limits. She was not a deity, not even a demon in the later sense, but an agent of fear, a living echo of her mistress's will. When Hecate's torches burned at the junctions of the world, Empusa walked ahead, the shimmer of her brass leg glinting in the dark as both warning and invitation. For the Greeks, belief was rarely about faith, was about survival. They lived close to the unknown, wild forests, uncharted seas, and roads that vanished into mountains. To imagine creatures like Empusa was not childish superstition, was psychological armor, a way of naming the dangers that waited in the dark. When a traveler vanished, when a child was lost to the night, it was not meaningless. Empusa had taken them. The world remained ordered. The horror had a name. But Empusa was not alone in her kind. Greek folklore teemed with phantoms of the night, female shapes that prowled the roads, whispering hunger into men's dreams. Some drained blood, some devoured flesh, others only frightened, feeding on the pulse of terror. Together, they formed a sisterhood of fear creatures that blurred the line between spirit and story. And at the center of this nocturnal web stood Empusa, the shapeshifter, the seductress, the one who leaps upon. She embodied the lesson hidden in every folk tale, the danger that hides in desire. When beauty walked the road at night, it was not to be trusted. When warmth appeared in a place that should be cold, it was not a blessing. The Greeks, who worshipped both gods and logic, understood this paradox deeply. To them, the night was not evil-lit, was simply untrustworthy. It was the domain of Hecate, and Empusa was her warning sign. Some storytellers described her as a phantom that fed on human life, others as a trickster spirit sent to frighten travelers for sport. Yet all agreed on one point: she struck when you stepped off the safe path. If you lingered where the torchlight ended, if curiosity lured you toward a glimmer in the dark, Empusa would find you. She might not kill you, not always. Sometimes she only appeared long enough to let you glimpse what she was. That was enough to break the mind. The name Empusa itself meant she who jumps upon, evoking both speed and inevitability. There was no time to run, no room for reason. One moment you were safe, the next your world had changed shape. And isn't that how fear works? It does not knock, it leaps. It replaces one reality with another in the space of a heartbeat. In this way, Empusa was more than a monster. She was a metaphor for boundary violation. The moment when comfort collapses into terror, when the familiar becomes strange. Hecate ruled these boundaries because she ruled transformation itself, the crossing over. Empusa was her emissary, sent to remind mortals that crossing over came with a price. Even the philosophers, men of reason, spoke of her in hushed tones. To them, she was a projection of the psyche, the embodiment of the chaos that reason could not tame. The poet Aristophanes would later turn her into a figure of comedy. But that came much later, when Athens had become arrogant in its light. In the older stories, the world was still dark, and the torches of Hecate burned dimly at the edge of the wild. Picture it now: a traveler, weary and lost, comes to the crossroads under a half moon. His torch flickers, his shadow trembles on the dust. He whispers a prayer, sets down an offering, an egg, a handful of breadcrumbs, and hopes it will be enough. But the night has already chosen him. From beyond the stones, a shape stirs. A foot of brass gleams once, twice, then vanishes again. He never reaches home. To the Greeks, this story was not cruelty, was caution. The darkness was not something to conquer, but to respect. The torches, the offerings, the prayers, they were acknowledgments of a truth that still lingers today. That the world is larger than what we can see, and somewhere in that unseen space, there are things that watch. Empusa's realm was that unseen space. Not heaven, not hell, but the crossroads, the threshold of all transformations, where choices are made and fates are sealed, where beauty may approach you smiling, and terror wears a human face. And as you stand there now, at your own imagined crossroads, perhaps you understand what the Greeks feared most. It was not death, nor monsters, nor even the gods. It was the moment before the step, fragile instant when you don't yet know what waits in the dark. The night deepens, and the crossroads fade behind you. Yet the echo of Empusa lingers like a taste on the air, metal and ash, beauty and fear twined into one impossible memory. You begin to realize that her terror lies not in her power, but in her form. For she was not made simply to frighten. She was designed to confuse, to mirror the contradictory nature of the human soul. In every tale that survived the centuries, Empusa is described through her parts, never whole, never stable. Her body was a map of contradiction, each fragment telling a story of what mortals most desired and most dreaded. One leg, forged of gleaming brass, reflected the moon with cruel perfection. The other, bestial sometimes of a mule, sometimes a cow, sometimes rotting flesh refused, that reflection entirely. One foot made to stride the earth, the other made to sink into it. The Greeks, who loved symbols as much as stories, read meaning into every unnatural shape. The brass leg was cold, unyielding, impervious to both pain and pity. It spoke of divine detachment, of something that sees humanity from above and feels nothing. The beast's leg, by contrast, throbbed with instinct, hunger, an appetite, the pull of the earth, the lust of the animal. Empusa stood at the meeting point of the two, where compassion died and desire began. She was, in essence, a living paradox, beautiful yet deformed, alluring yet abominable. The Greeks understood her not as a simple monster, but as a lesson sculpted in horror, that what we most crave often carries within it the seed of our undoing. Her hair was another riddle fire that lived. To some, it was the mark of her mother, Hecate's torches transfigured into living flame. To others, it was the sign of her soul, always burning, never resting. Fire, to the ancients, meant both life and destruction. It cooked the food that nourished you. It also devoured your home in seconds. Empusa's burning crown embodied that dual truth. When she appeared under moonlight, her hair did not illuminate it, consumed the light, turning it red, restless, alive. And her face no story could capture it for long. Every description contradicts another. Sometimes fair as a goddess, sometimes hideous as decay, sometimes both in the same heartbeat. Ancient storytellers said that to look upon her was to see the world shift. A shepherd might swear he saw a maiden. A traveler might claim she had the head of a serpent. But all agreed on one point. Whatever you saw, you wished you hadn't. She was not chaos for chaos's sake. She was reflection. When you met her, she became what your heart most longed for, and then she twisted it. To the lonely, she was companionship. To the lustful, temptation. To the proud, admiration. Yet the gift always curdled. The beauty decayed as soon as you reached for it. Empusa did not need to destroy her victims. She let them destroy themselves through belief. Consider the subtle cruelty of that design. Her shape-shifting was not only physical, it was psychological. She revealed the fragility of perception itself. How quickly does desire blind us? How easily does fear rewrite what we see? The Greeks feared her because she exposed that truth. Beneath every act of worship, beneath every law and prayer, lay a single, trembling truth, that reality itself depended on faith. And Empusa could break faith with a glance. It was said she could change faster than thought. In one blink, she might be a cow. In the next, a radiant girl with lips red as pomegranate. Aristophanes later wrote of her transformations with humor, as if they were stage tricks, but even comedy could not strip them of their unease. The very idea of something that could not hold shape was horrifying. To the ancient mind, form meant order. Empusa's instability was not just monstrous, it was blasphemous. When the Greeks carved statues of their gods, they sought symmetry, permanence, control. Empusa was the antithesis of all of it flesh that refused to stay still. Her very existence whispered rebellion against the divine order. A thing that could not be predicted, could not be contained, and what cannot be contained is always feared. And yet, her contradictions were not random. The poets who dared to write of her believed that Empusa embodied the night itself. For night, too, is double-faced. It hides danger and dreams, passion and decay. To call her the daughter of Hecate was to admit that the goddess's domain witchcraft, necromancy, Crossroads, was not evil but ambiguous. In the space between comfort and terror, Hecate's light wavered, and Empusa stepped through. In this way, her monstrous beauty carried meaning, the brass leg of logic, the beast's leg of chaos, the hair of fire illumination and annihilation bound together, and the shifting face our own reflection in the mirror of fear. Every feature of Empusa whispered the same truth, that humanity's greatest horror is not the unknown, is the known turned unfamiliar. The Greeks did not need Empusa to explain murder or war. They needed her to explain the quiet dread that crawls in when something ordinary becomes wrong, when the lover's smile feels too wide, when the shadow moves without wind, when the warmth in a voice suddenly turns hollow. Empusa was that feeling given shape, the trembling line where recognition becomes revulsion. Imagine again that brass foot stepping toward you, gleaming coldly in the moonlight. Imagine the faint scent of smoke as her hair flares. Her face flickers between 1,000 forms, each one briefly yours, as if she's wearing your memories. You blink, and she is gone. But the echo of her paradox remains, burned into your thoughts like an afterimage. Beauty and horror sharing the same breath. That was Empusa's gift and her curse. She did not live to destroy humanity. She existed to remind it that perfection is impossible, that every desire casts a shadow. She was both warning and mirror, a riddle no mortal could answer. What happens when the thing you love begins to devour you? And as the Greeks passed her story from mouth to mouth, they began to understand what she truly represented. Not death, not evil, but the delicate balance that keeps both at bay, the terror that ensures you never mistake the darkness for a friend. The centuries roll backward in your mind like a slow-burning reel of memory. The firelight of the shepherd's tale fades, replaced by the flickering oil lamps of an Athenian theatre. You can almost hear the hum of 1,000 murmurs in the air, the crowd restless, the stage bare, the night outside thick with summer heat, and at the heart of it all, a playwright steps forward with mischief in his eyes. His name is Aristophanes, and tonight he will make Athens laugh at its own fears. The play is The Frogs. On the surface, it is a comedy. Dionysus, the god of wine and theatre himself, descending into the underworld to bring back a dead poet. The story is absurd, bawdy, and brilliant, but hidden between its jokes and rhythms lies a strange shadow, the sudden, shocking appearance of Empusa. In this version, she doesn't creep out from the dark road or the lonely field. She leaps onto the stage itself. The audience gasps. Even in daylight, her name carries weight. She flickers between shapes, a cow, a mule, a radiant woman, a dog, a serpent. The changes happen so fast that the crowd can hardly keep track. The actor's costume spins, the chorus howls, and Dionysus, supposedly the god of ecstasies, reduced to a trembling fool. He clings to his servant, babbling, eyes wide in comic terror. The laughter is instant. The audience roars. But beneath the humor lies something deeper. Recognition. They laugh because they know her. They've heard the stories whispered by their mothers, seen the torch offerings at the crossroads. They laugh not because she is unreal, but because she is too real. Aristophanes knew that the surest way to master fear was to mock it, to turn the horror into a joke. And yet, even as the laughter echoes, a part of the audience still feels the gooseflesh rise. Comedy in ancient Greece was not escape, it was ritual inversion. By placing Empusa in the realm of laughter, Aristophanes was not erasing her terror, but transforming it. He turned the night's monster into a creature of daylight, allowing people to confront her safely within the glow of torches and the protection of collective joy. It was, in its own way, an act of worship. But when the play ended, when the lamps were extinguished and the crowd dispersed into the city's labyrinth of narrow streets, the darkness reclaimed her. Outside the theatre walls, Empusa returned to her true domain of roads, where the torches didn't reach, the thresholds between one village and the next. There, she was no longer a punchline, but a presence. Around the same time, her story began to change shape, much like she herself did. Folklore absorbed her, blending her image with other feminine spirits of the night. Lamia, once a Libyan queen cursed by Hera after bearing Zeus's children, became one of her echoes. Lamia's grief drove her mad. She devoured her own offspring, and from that moment hunted the children of others. The Greeks said her eyes never closed, that Hera had cursed her to be forever awake, forever mourning. Then there was Mormo, a lesser shadow, a name murmured to frighten children. Go to sleep, mothers would say, or Mormo will come. Like Empusa, she lurked in darkness. Like Lamia, she punished disobedience. Over time, the three merged a Lamia, Mormo, Empusa, trinity of warning, their identities braided into one mythic thread. The lines blurred until one could stand for all. But even within that blur, Empusa kept something distinct. She remained the hunter of the road, the spectre of the traveler. Lamia haunted cradles, Mormo haunted dreams, but Empusa haunted footsteps. She belonged to Hecate, and through her, the night retained its moral order. The message was simple: those who stray from the light invite the consequences of darkness. Imagine now an old Athenian village. The fields are quiet, the hearth's gone cold. A mother stirs the ashes of her fire and glances toward the door. Her husband is late returning from the city. The moon hangs low, and the road between here and Athens winds through forests where the gods no longer walk. She sets out a small bowl of honey and eggs by the doorway and, offering to Hecate, and whispers the old prayer, "Keep the brass foot from my door." Outside, a breeze moves through the olive trees. Something glints far off on the path. A traveler hurries by, clutching his cloak tight. He swears he hears laughter behind him, faint and beautiful, and when he turns, there is nothing there but the smell of smoke. Empusa had become more than a story. She was a shared cultural instinct, the embodiment of every warning carved into the Greek imagination. She represented the night's countless dangers, thieves, beasts, hunger, madness woven together under one name. To the rational mind, she was superstition. To the poetic soul, she was truth given form. The Greeks, ever the philosophers, did not separate myth from psychology. For them, Empusa was both external and internal. She was the traveler's fear and the reason for that fear. The shimmer of movement at the edge of vision, and the part of you that wants to look. They understood that fear was not the enemy, was a teacher. In this way, Empusa became the night's pedagogue. She punished recklessness, rewarded humility, and reminded mortals of the thinness of their safety. Aristophanes may have made her ridiculous, but the lesson remained unbroken. To mock a monster is not to kill it. It only hides for a while, waiting for the laughter to fade. And when it did, when the people walked home beneath the same indifferent moon, Empusa walked with them, unseen. The flicker of her brass leg shimmered between the stones, and her living hair whispered in the wind. In the laughter of the city and the silence of the road, she existed as both ghost and metaphor, proof that the line between them was as fragile as firelight. So when the Greeks looked into the dark and thought they saw something moving, they didn't ask if it was they asked which face she wore tonight. Now the firelight wanes again, and the story draws near its end. You can almost hear the distant hush of waves against a foreign shore, the sound of time itself wearing the edges off the world. Empusa, the hunter of the road, has faded from the living memory of Greece, but her shadow has never vanished. She merely changed her mask, as she always did. When the Hellenistic age waned and the old gods fell silent, her name lingered in whispers. Travelers of later centuries would still speak of a woman seen under the moon, beautiful and terrible, her foot flashing like bronze. In Rome, she blended into the Lamia and Mormo myths entirely. Her name rarely spoken, but her nature still alive. Beauty that devours danger, disguised as desire. From there, she drifted like smoke through time. Across the dark tapestry of Europe, stories began to bloom with familiar patterns. A pale woman visiting men in their dreams. A creature who drinks their life, leaving only exhaustion and longing. The medieval world would call her Succubus, a demon who seduces, drains, and corrupts. But though the word changed, the fear did not. It was still the same primal warning. Lust can consume, and beauty can betray. Yet there is an important difference, one the modern imagination often forgets. Empusa was never born of sin. She did not crawl from the Christian hell, nor tempt men toward damnation. Her hunger was not moral, it was elemental. She was nature's own paradox, made flesh, the wildness that civilization feared but could never truly banish. The succubus, by contrast, was born from theology, an enemy of purity, a symbol of forbidden pleasure. She came with rules, hierarchies, divine oppositions. But Empusa came from before the rules. She was the memory of when the world was still ungoverned, when moonlight itself could be alive. Even the sirens, those singers of death who lured sailors onto the rocks, were her kin. The difference was subtle but vital. The sirens killed indiscriminately, their beauty a net cast wide. Empusa's approach was intimate. She met you on the road, looked into your eyes, and chose you. There was conversation, recognition, almost empathy until there wasn't. Where the sirens destroyed from afar, Empusa destroyed by proximity. Her violence was personal, her hunger almost emotional. In that sense, she was the perfect reflection of humanity's most private dread, that the thing which loves you most might someday feed on you. Over time, storytellers softened her. Some made her tragic, cursed by Hecate to hunt when she longed for peace. Others imagined her as a spirit misunderstood, condemned by men for wielding power they feared. These retellings made her easier to love, but also stripped away the truth. The Greeks never pitied Empusa. They respected her. She was not victim or villain. She was the price of crossing boundaries, the guardian of restraint, the echo of the wild that humankind had tried to bury. If you close your eyes, you can still feel her presence, not as a ghost, but as a concept, alive in every story where desire meets danger. She lives in the vampire's kiss, in the warning whispered before midnight, in every tale that begins with a beautiful stranger and ends in silence. She is the shimmer on the edge of the torchlight, reminding you that not everything bright was made to be approached. The philosophers of later centuries would have called her an archetype, the feminine predator, the mirror of temptation. But to the ancient heart, she was simpler and more terrible. She was the proof that light itself casts a shadow, and that shadow hungers. What Empusa taught across all her masks and centuries was not fear for fear's sake, was balance. The Greeks knew that those who deny their own darkness invite it in. The man who swears he has no weakness is the one she finds most delicious. For Empusa hunts not in forests or mountains, but in the human heart, where boundaries blur and reason sleeps. Even now, she walks unseen among her descendants, the seductress, the deceiver, the monster who looks like love. She does not need to appear with brass leg or flaming hair. She has adapted. She wears the faces we give her, the screen that glows too late at night, the voice that whispers what we want to hear, the dream that lures us past safety into surrender. And so the story returns to where it began to you, walking alone under the moon. The road is quiet again, but you sense that you are not the first to pass this way, nor the last. Somewhere between one breath and the next, the world grows still. Perhaps you hear it, a faint clink, clink in the distance. Or perhaps it's only your heartbeat. Empusa will never truly vanish, because she was never just a monster. She was a question one humanity still struggles to answer. Can beauty exist without danger? Can desire exist without loss? Can we ever walk in the dark without wanting to look? The Greeks knew the answer. They told stories about her to remember it. They offered honey and eggs to Hecate, not to banish the night, but to live with it. To accept that even within fear there is wisdom, and within wisdom fear must remain. So if, one night, you find yourself beneath a pale sky and think you see movement at the edge of the light, do not run, do not speak, simply bow your head and keep to the road. The darkness will watch you pass, curious, patient, eternal. Because somewhere out there, where moonlight ends and shadow begins, and still walks, and every time we fear the beauty that might destroy us, she smiles. The night breathes once more. The road continues. The flame fades to ash.